One of my favorite jerkbaits I've used is this tiny one I got from a mystery tackle box a few years ago. Considering the beautiful weather and balmy garage conditions, I wanted today's build to be a quick one, so I decided it was the perfect time to try making my own version. I started by freehanding a wire harness that was about the same size as my reference lure. I'll be using a sliver of balsa wood for the body, so I needed to have a single piece of hardware that wouldn't rely on the balsa for structural integrity. It's been a while since I've made one of these wire harnesses though, so to make it look okay, I had to work out a few kinks. For the next step, I used my wire harness to measure and mark what I needed from this thin strip of balsa and cut it to size. Then, I drew a rough outline for the body and rough cut it out with the utility knife. While it was still square, I used the hand drill to hollow out a couple of holes I'd use to add weight to the belly later. Then, I marked the center points on either side of the lure to use as guides, and ignored them while cutting an off-centered slot for the wire harness. Tiny lures like this are hard to get right because there's not much material you can use to correct for mistakes, especially when it comes to carving and balancing. I knew even a small error could ruin the lure's action, so I wanted to leave as much extra material as I could during carving and refine the shape later during the sanding step. Once I made sure I had used my entire margin for error, I slid the wire harness into the slot and glued it into place. I used a small file to do the rest of the shaping for the lure. I'm still not sure if this was from sanding material away or smushing the delicate balsa wood, but either way, I managed to get the body into a fishier shape. With such a small lure, most of the weight will come from the hardware and clear coat, so I wanted to get a baseline weight before adding any lead. Just a few drops almost triples the weight, and I thought this was pushing it though, so I tried to shave off the excess sticking out from the body. But what actually happened is I cut off a chunk of wood instead. So I cleaned that up and removed the lead to cut it to a better size. I put it back in its hole and weighed it again to make sure I was happy with the weight I'd removed. Then I glued both pieces of lead into place. Next, I used super glue and baking soda to fill in the lead holes in the wire harness slot. I used as little as possible because once it hardens, super glue and baking soda is a lot harder than the balsa wood, so it's easy to sand off more wood than you want to when you go to smooth everything out. While I had the super glue handy, I used it to seal the wood. Balsa soaks it up like a sponge, so I used a couple coats to strengthen the wood and make sure it got a good seal. I sprayed it with some super glue accelerator and weighed it again. I found a piece of plastic that had broken off of a storage container, and with a little bit of filing, turned it into the perfect size lip for this tiny bait. Then, for the first time in my life, I used a micro file to cut out a lip slot. Turns out, it was a perfect fit for this lip. With the hard part out of the way, I got started sanding the super glue skin to a smooth finish. Using a small block of wood as a prop when sanding your lure helps you get better leverage to sand at different angles, especially with one as small as this. My leverage was a little too good, though, and I sanded right through the super glue layer and had to reapply before I could glue the lip into place. I like to use epoxy for the lip because it gives you a little more time to work with, but this one turned out okay, thankfully. A turn and a half from the hand drill was enough to go through the entire width of the body, so this lure doesn't get any eye sockets, but the super glue bath and baking soda eyes have added even more significant weight. At this point my hands were frozen, but luckily the airbrush paint wasn't. So I loaded some white into the cup and laid down a base coat. I followed that up with some green going along the upper half of the body, and then added some blue spots to the sides. To finish the terrible tiny trout paint scheme I had going, I used a very dark red color and added way too many smaller spots, then went over the back and head with a darker green. I couldn't find my window screen to use for scales, so the last layer was just a thin, solid layer of metallic gold. It's definitely not my best trout paint job, but it's definitely my worst. Keeping with the terrible trout theme, I added some eyes that were way too small before applying the clear coat. It was so cold in the garage the adhesive on the eyes didn't want to stick, so I had to be extra careful not to move them out of the way while brushing on the epoxy, which then got cured in my UV oven. I knew by the weight that the lure was going to sink, but I wanted to use a small cup to see how balanced it was before I took it to the test tub. I was happy to see it has a decent jerk pause action, and even happier to see a nice tight wiggle on a straight retrieve. As I said before, these small lures are hard to get right, and I'm pretty pleased with how this one turned out. The final product came in at just over 1/6 of an ounce and about 2 inches long. I think I can go smaller though, so let me know if that's something you'd be interested in seeing in the future. But either way, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll catch you next time.